There's a marvellous book on health law in the European Union written by Jean McHale, who would see herself as a medical lawyer who veers towards being a bioethicist, and Tammy Harvey, who wouldn't ever consider herself to be a bioethicist, and yet it's absolutely crucial. And if we become too deeply immersed in bioethics rather than your partners, we risk losing at our peril valuable links with other disciplines within legal scholarship. Let me come on to my second theme, polite argumentation. Some years ago, as others in the university started to look more closely at the motley crew that is CSEP, a recurring question, particularly from the medics, became this: what's the CSEP line on PGD, assisted dying, save your siblings? A degree of horror came over the face of a number of senior medics when we said, well, Soren takes this view, Margot takes that, Charles Erin takes another, and John Harris says that we're all completely wrong. When a working party I chaired proposed guidelines on the care of extremely premature and severely disabled neonates, my mobile rang as I was doing media interviews in London. It was a colleague in the university, sounding as though there was some real death or disaster. I thought perhaps the law school had been blown up. And she said, have you seen John Harris on television? He's on television and he's saying that the Nuffield Working Party is completely wrong to rule out neonatal euthanasia. What are you going to do about it? I told her that I hadn't seen him, but I would have been surprised and actually quite worried if he hadn't been on television. I would have run up to check that he was all right. CSEP didn't fall apart, and we are the stronger for the spectrum of views that we hold between us. Facing regular interrogation forces us all to review our argument and to avoid stasis. It enables us to work together and seek that consensus, however rare, more efficiently. But Matty's word polite is very important. There has to be mutual respect, and some of the language of current debates, not just in the public fora but in the academy, makes constructive argument difficult. Policy making and impact, picking up some themes from David. Let me come to a role in the policy arenas. Once upon a time, again, it was a bit of a hobby. Those of us who were around long enough got invited to do something for the government or got invited to take part in media debates. Now, of course, it's become the sacred cow of impact. Those of us here and in our joint disciplines are in many ways blessed in our opportunities to take the argument to the public in the way that your project has done, Mark, and to be directly involved in shaping policy as it affects medical and biological science. I consider it's not just an important part of our work, but something that we should do. But I do see, as David did, a real difficulty in doing it well. Let's think about the media first. There's an expectation in the media that if you've been able to comment constructively on, for example, a decision of the family court to refuse to order doctors to resuscitate a very sick baby, if you've said something that was sensible, didn't sound too bad on television, your mum didn't ring up and say, why didn't you brush your hair? The media will then assume that you're also available to comment on, shall we say, the ethics of smart drugs or xenografts, or in fact, any controversy in medicine and science. It's rather as though they went to a gynecologist to comment on a new hip replacement technique. Polite refusal to the media, in my experience, I'd be glad to hear whether I'm unique, doesn't go down very well. Because the impression seems to be held by some of the media, not all, that some expertise in bioethics, or the law as it relates to bioethics, encompasses any area you choose to mention. And it's made more difficult by the fact that there are those of our number who will comment on anything and everything. And in doing so, they actually do the rest of us no favours and they devalue scholarship. Further problem with engagement with the media is that, of course, they want controversy. They don't want comment. An attempt to address the complexity of debates about saviour siblings, to point out that some of the arguments on both sides are specious, will be met by, what side are you on? Or as I was asked not very long ago, you're supposed to be a Christian, so you're against all embryo research, aren't you? No, I'm not. Well, that's why we asked you. You're against all embryo research, aren't you? No, I'm not. Participating in policy making at government level, or in any formal review process, of course allows more time than media participation. And it's more likely to harness our specialisms, to ask us to do something we know a little bit about, to use the skills we've developed to make use of our time in the ivory tower, so to speak. But it too, again as Dave said, has its frustrations. Those commissioning our work may have a very different agenda than that was put to you when you accepted the invitation to serve. When I agreed to chair the Retained Organs Commission, what I understood I was going to be doing was advising the government on drafting new legislation on human tissue. I didn't know that I was going to be managing a huge enterprise that was actually going to be meeting on a regular basis with angry and furious families and actually have relatively little role in drafting human tissue legislation. It tests the limit, again, as has been said before, your powers to seek a sustainable and justifiable compromise. I had written down in my notes, it may be my own experience, I know it's mine and Dave's. The choice is all too often the lesser evil as much as the greater good. If the philosopher's mantra is speak the truth, the lawyer's is, in a sense, make it work. Produce something that will actually make things better, even if it doesn't make things as much better as you would like. Above all, though, I think policymaking reinforces the need for a lawyer invited into such a body for strong disciplinary roots, that lawyers should be lawyers and philosophers should be philosophers and doctors should be doctors. Even in the most distinguished company, the difference between the philosopher and the lawyer may not be fully appreciated. Sitting on the Nuffield Working Party on Premature Babies with David Archard, I was once phoned by a colleague and cross-examined on various points of fairly abstract philosophy. Why don't you ring Dave, I said, or Alistair Campbell? Well, we tried and they're not there. Ring again. Well, we thought you'd know about it. It's almost as though we're all the same sort of animal. Law plays a crucial role in the how to do as much as the what to do. Proposals for guidelines must be compatible with law or demand legal reforms. Proposals for law reforms must be practical. They must take into account all the consequences. Consider the debate, it's rather an outdated one now, on whether you could ever enforce a caesarean section on a capacitous woman who was well aware that natural delivery created a significant risk of the child being born alive but with serious disabilities. So we get round some of the issues relating to the status of the fetus. She objects, highly hypothetical likes it, for a non-good reason, the prospect of scarring. Even if we could all agree that she acts unethically, should the law compel her? Can we swallow powers of arrest, use of restraints, forcible removal to the operating theatre? And we must always think when legislating of the message to others. Because the message, perhaps, that there were the most extraordinary, unbelievable and exceptional circumstances in which a court could order a woman to a caesarean section would rapidly be translated to the public that any woman who didn't want a caesarean section was at risk of being forced to have one. So we must look at the message to others who might incline to say no but be persuadable, but on the basis of the publicity attached to the one case might now avoid obstetricians like the plague. I think we have to rejoice in the difference between bioethics and law. We have to accept the limitations of our discipline. And I'll end, I think, perhaps by saying what I think is the most serious limitation of many lawyers. And that is, of our very nature, we tend to be rather insular. There are many different legal traditions in the world. Within the common law tradition that pertains in England and most of the English-speaking world and North America and Canada, there are significant differences. There are even greater differences, of course, when one contrasts the common law tradition to the civil law tradition of continental Europe, or indeed to the theocratic systems of many other parts of the world. So we have a great deal to learn from bioethicists, particularly in the nature of how we make our discipline global. I'm not sure how much you have to learn from us, but I think we have a great deal that we can do to help and assist you, and we will do it more effectively if we are recognised as being a slightly different animal. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions on imputation, so to speak? Because are the really real issue questions I would like to invite to the panel. If not, then I would like to invite the other two speakers of today's session. Oh, sorry, on the question of imputation.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed that. I just wanted to comment a little bit. You've raised something that we haven't talked about, but that is crucial to the story of bioethics, which is what kind of discipline bioethics is. And something that I very much agree with you is that we are a multidisciplinary endeavour taken as a whole, but our parts are not. We're not multidisciplinary in and of ourselves, even if we can often work in those areas, and that we're trained in different types of disciplines, very much what Dave was saying about the philosophy expertise he brings. But increasingly the kinds of PhDs we teach are almost multidisciplinary in themselves, especially when, I co-supervise with Jean in law, and, so there's a sense in which, do you think we are creating multidisciplinary animals that are not the distinct species of bioethics as we are? And, I'm not sure that will work, but there is a tendency to that.
I think that's a really interesting question because, as you say, there are an increasing number of PhD students, an increasing number of my PhD students who straddle law and ethics, or sometimes law and social science in this area. I suspect there is a generation growing up who will be much more able, certainly, than my generation to do the multidisciplinary thing within one person. But I still have this strong feeling that there is such a huge range of knowledge that we need collectively to do things properly that in the end, valuable though that 3 or 4 years training in your 20s will be, and much better educated though those students will be in philosophy and ethics than I am, you may have to plump for a choice. You may not say, as I would say, I am a lawyer. I'm a lawyer who's passionately interested in bioethics and who loves working with bioethics, but that's what I am. The next generation on will probably be able to say, I am trained in law and ethics. I am predominantly a lawyer. I find it difficult to believe that many people, there are the exceptions, will be able to achieve the 50-50 mode. And what I worry about in law is that we could lose the technical expertise, the how-to. An analogy I almost used, I used it once and my lawyer friends got very upset. I said, perhaps you could almost regard the bioethicists as the architects and we are the civil engineers. The difficulty is that most people actually devalue engineers. I don't. I think it's just as an important task. And I'm actually quite sad that one of the less positive things perhaps about some of the several generations below me in bioethics is that they do devalue the need to really understand how law works. The obligations are different if they're in contract and tort. And if I can give another example about why I think the importance of international law to the more globalized ethics. A long time ago, I taught what I thought then was a very dry subject called private international law. Basically, imagine that we set up a contract and then we have a dispute. The first question, because you're from the Netherlands and I'm from England, would be, do you apply English law or the Netherlands law? Imagine I'd married somebody from Iran. He then said, I divorce you, I divorce you. The question would be, could he actually do that, which he could do at home? Actually, that area of law is becoming increasingly important in the context of bioethics. So I've advised, careful what I say, not very long ago, on a very complicated surrogacy case where the major skill acquired of me was trying to dredge out of my mind my old skill as a private international lawyer in order to say whether a particular order issued by a foreign court should be recognised by this one.
Okay, you know?
Oh, I'll just turn around and you can hear me anyway, probably. All right, that's even better than if I turn around. What I found interesting is that you were just talking about multidisciplinarity, obviously there's multiple disciplines, right? When I was, sorry to say, but when I was younger, we used this other euphemism, interdisciplinarity, that finally we did away with because nobody knew what it meant. Today we have multidisciplinarity, and my question to you is there something beyond pragmatic working together on things, or is there something conceptually where there could be sort of a cross-fertilization, if you know what I mean, people learning from each other as opposed to, I don't know how to put it, but it's not so bad not to say you know what I mean. The togetherness, the same as David with his committees, right? You have the scientists, they have their own language and their own concepts, and the lawyers with their own concepts. And how actually, in your experience practically, like in your center, how did you actually work together as opposed to on paper and for an application and whatnot?
I go back to what I said very early on in my talk. An awful lot of it is about conversation. We don't have the time for them. And I have received an excellent education from my colleagues who started off their lives as philosophers, an education that I'm probably too lazy to have gone to get for myself. I hope it's worked the other way. I suppose, because I think I've been quite polite about bioethicists, one slightly critical thing I would say that has occurred to me sometimes is that virtually everybody who works in bio law, as I'll call it for the moment, would consider that they must familiarise themselves with at least the basics of moral philosophy and issues in bioethics. It doesn't always work the other way. On an anonymised basis, if I can use an anecdote, we had a colleague who was looking at issues... No, definitely not unless you torture me, and then I'll do whatever you want. A colleague who was working on the legality of doing extraordinary things, chopping your arms off. And so, of course, there is in England a case which says that you can't make lawful things done to your body that form actual bodily harm simply by your consent. It's the case of the Queen against Brown. It's all about the most bizarre sadomasochistic practices not to be read just before or just after a meal.